The alarm screams filled the cockpit as Jake Morrison fought with the controls. His small scout ship, the Pathfinder, shook violently as it fell through the atmosphere of the jungle moon below. Smoke poured from the damaged engine and sparks flew from the control panel. Jake had been on a simple survey mission, mapping unknown star systems at the edge of explored space. Everything had been going fine until the engine suddenly exploded without warning. Come on, Jake muttered through gritted teeth, pulling hard on the flight stick. The ship refused to respond properly. The ground was coming up fast, covered in thick green jungle as far as he could see. He had maybe 30 seconds before impact. Jake quickly strapped himself in tighter and covered his head with his arms. The ship hit the top of the jungle canopy with a terrible crashing sound. Branches and leaves exploded around him as the Pathfinder tore through the trees. Metal screamed and bent. Glass shattered. Jake felt himself thrown against his harness so hard he couldn't breathe. Then everything went black. When Jake woke up, pain shot through his entire body. His head throbbed and something warm and wet ran down his face. Blood. He touched his forehead carefully and winced. The cockpit was destroyed around him. The windscreen was completely gone, and vines and leaves had already started creeping inside. He could hear strange sounds from the jungle outside, clicks and howls and buzzing noises that made his skin crawl. Jake unbuckled himself with shaking hands and checked his body for injuries. His left arm hurt badly, probably sprained or fractured. His ribs ached with every breath. But he could walk, and that was what mattered. He grabbed his emergency pack from under the seat. Inside was a med kit, some food rations, a water purifier, a basic tent, and a distress beacon. He activated the beacon immediately, but the small screen showed damage. The signal was weak, maybe only reaching a few light years instead of the usual range. Okay, Jake said to himself, trying to stay calm. Rescue will come. Just need to survive until then. He climbed out of the wreckage carefully. The Pathfinder had carved a long scar through the jungle before coming to rest against a massive tree. The jungle around him was like nothing on Earth. The trees were enormous, their bark a deep purple color. Strange flowers glowed faintly in the dim light that filtered through the thick canopy. Everything smelled wet and rotten and alive all at once. Jake found a relatively clear spot about 50 meters from the wreck and set up his small tent. He cleaned and bandaged his head wound using the medkit, then made a splint for his arm. The pain was bad, but the medkit had some painkillers that helped. As the light started to fade, Jake realized he had made it through the first challenge. Now he just had to wait. The jungle came alive at night. Sounds erupted from every direction. Something howled in the distance, a sound that made Jake's blood run cold. Closer by, he heard rustling and movement in the undergrowth. His tent had a basic motion sensor that would alert him if anything large came near. But that didn't make him feel much safer. On the second night, the sensor started beeping frantically. Jake sat up fast, ignoring the pain in his ribs. He grabbed the small pistol from his emergency pack and aimed it at the tent entrance with trembling hands. The beeping got faster and faster. Something big was coming closer. Then he heard it. Heavy footsteps, each one deliberate and slow. Whatever was out there wasn't in a hurry. Jake's heart pounded so hard he thought it might burst. The footsteps stopped right outside his tent. Through the thin fabric, Jake could see a shadow. It was huge, easily 9 feet tall, with a shape that looked almost humanoid but wrong in ways he couldn't quite describe. The shadow moved around the tent slowly, as if examining it. Jake held his breath, his finger on the trigger of his pistol, knowing the small weapon probably wouldn't do much against something that size. Then the shadow moved away. Jake heard the footsteps retreating. He let out a long, shaky breath. Maybe it had lost interest. Maybe he was safe. The screaming started 5 minutes later. It came from the jungle to his left, high-pitched and terrified. Multiple voices, definitely not human. Then came other sounds. Growling, snarling, and the terrible noise of something being torn apart. Jake wanted to stay in his tent, wanted to hide and hope everything would go away. But curiosity and fear made him peek outside. What he saw would stay with him forever. In a small clearing visible through the trees, at least a dozen creatures swarmed together. They looked like a cross between wolves and lizards, each one the size of a large dog, with too many legs and mouths full of needle-sharp teeth. They were fighting something in the center of their pack, something big and dark that moved with terrible speed and power. It was the creature from before. The 9-foot shadow. Jake watched in horrified fascination as the massive creature fought off the pack. It moved like liquid death, impossibly fast for something so large. Claws that caught the moonlight slashed through the air. One of the wolf lizard things flew past Jake's position, dead before it hit the ground. The creature had obsidian black scales that seemed to absorb light, and eyes that glowed faintly red in the darkness. The fight lasted less than a minute. When it was over, the surviving wolf lizards ran away into the jungle, leaving their dead behind. The massive creature stood in the clearing, breathing heavily. Then it turned and looked directly at Jake's hiding spot. Jake froze. Those red eyes stared at him across the distance. He was certain he was about to die. The creature took a step toward him, then another. Jake raised his pistol with a shaking hand, knowing it was useless but unable to just give up. The creature stopped at the edge of the clearing. It looked at Jake for a long moment. Then it did something completely unexpected. It reached down, picked up one of the dead wolf lizards and threw it toward Jake's position. The body landed a few meters away. Jake stared at the dead creature, then back at the massive being in the clearing. Was it offering him food? That made no sense. Nothing about this made any sense. The creature watched him for another moment, then turned and walked away into the jungle. Its footsteps faded into the night sounds, leaving Jake alone with his confusion and a growing sense that he had just witnessed something impossible. He didn't sleep at all that night, his mind racing with questions. What was that creature? Why had it saved him from the pack? And why had it given him food? The answer would come in the days ahead, and it would change everything Jake thought he knew about the galaxy. Morning came slowly to the jungle moon. Jake hadn't slept, too afraid and too confused by what had happened. The dead wolf lizard creature still lay where the massive being had thrown it. As daylight filtered through the purple trees, Jake could see it more clearly. It was definitely dead, its neck broken cleanly. The massive creature had killed it with a single blow. Jake's stomach growled. He had food rations in his pack, but they wouldn't last forever. He looked at the dead creature and grimaced. Could he eat it? Was it even safe? But if the massive being had given it to him as food, maybe that meant it was okay to eat. He dragged the body closer to his camp, careful of his injured arm. Using his survival knife, he carefully cut away a small piece of meat. He cooked it thoroughly over a small fire, then waited to see if it made him sick. After an hour with no bad reaction, he ate more. It tasted strange, gamey, and tough, but it was food. As he ate, Jake thought about his mysterious benefactor. Everything he knew about xenobiology told him that what happened last night was impossible. Predators didn't share food with other species. They especially didn't protect potential prey from other predators. Nothing about the creature's behavior made sense from an evolutionary standpoint. That afternoon, it came back. Jake heard the heavy footsteps approaching and grabbed his pistol again, though he wasn't sure why. The weapon clearly wouldn't help him if the creature wanted him dead. The massive being emerged from the jungle and stopped at the edge of Jake's camp. In the daylight, Jake could see it properly for the first time. It was terrifying and magnificent at the same time. Standing at least 9 feet tall, its body was covered in scales that looked like polished black stone. Its arms were long and powerful, ending in hands that had 6 fingers tipped with claws as long as Jake's knife. Its head was angular and reptilian, with those glowing red eyes set deep under a heavy brow. Its mouth was full of teeth designed for tearing meat. Every instinct Jake had screamed at him to run. This was an apex predator, a killing machine that evolution had perfected over millions of years. But Jake remembered last night. This creature had saved him. It had given him food. So he stayed still, watching it carefully. The creature watched him back. Then slowly, deliberately, it sat down on the ground. The movement was careful, almost gentle, as if it was trying not to scare Jake. They stared at each other across the small clearing. "Hello," Jake said quietly, his voice shaking slightly. "Thank you for the food." The creature tilted its head, a gesture that reminded Jake oddly of a curious dog. It made a sound, a deep rumbling that came from its chest. Not threatening, just a sound. Maybe an acknowledgement? Jake slowly reached into his pack and pulled out a food ration bar. He held it up so the creature could see, then took a bite. Then he pulled out another bar and slowly, carefully, tossed it toward the creature. The massive being looked at the bar, then back at Jake. One clawed hand reached out and picked up the small package. The creature examined it carefully, sniffed it, then tried to open it. Its claws were too large and sharp. The wrapper tore apart and the bar fell on the ground. Jake couldn't help it. He laughed. It was probably the stress and fear, but watching this terrifying predator struggle with a simple food wrapper struck him as funny. He stopped laughing quickly when the creature's eyes fixed on him, but he could have sworn he saw something like curiosity in those red eyes, not anger. The creature picked up the bar and ate it in one bite. It made another rumbling sound, then stood up. Jake tensed, but the creature simply turned and walked back into the jungle. This became their routine. The creature would visit once or twice a day. Sometimes it brought food, dead animals from the jungle. Sometimes Jake would share his dwindling rations. They would sit together for a while, not close but not far apart either. Jake started talking to it, just to hear a human voice telling it about Earth and space travel and his family back home. The creature would listen, making soft rumbling sounds occasionally. On the fourth day, Jake tried something bold. He stood up slowly and took a step toward the creature. It watched him but didn't move. Jake took another step, then another, until he was only a few feet away. This close, he could feel the heat radiating from the creature's body. He could see the pattern of its scales like interlocking armor plates. Slowly, Jake extended his good hand, palm up, a universal gesture of peace. The creature looked at his hand for a long moment. Then, with careful precision that seemed impossible for something with such large claws, it reached out and gently touched Jake's palm with one finger. The claw was smooth and warm. "Friends?" Jake whispered. The creature rumbled softly. A sound that Jake had learned meant something like agreement or contentment. Then it pulled its hand back and tapped its own chest with one claw. It made a sound, a specific combination of growls and clicks. "Krath," Jake's eyes widened. Was that a name? "Krath," he repeated, trying to copy the sounds. "Your name is Krath?" The creature Krath rumbled again and nodded its massive head. Then it pointed at Jake with one claw, a clear question. "Jake," he said, tapping his own chest. "I'm Jake Morrison." "Jake," Krath attempted, the sound rough but recognizable. The creature seemed pleased with itself. Over the next few days, their communication improved. They developed a basic system of gestures and sounds. Jake learned that Krath lived alone, which seemed unusual for a species that was clearly intelligent. He got the impression that Krath had been cast out from his people somehow, though the details were hard to understand. Jake also learned that Krath was an excellent hunter and seemed to know the jungle intimately. Whenever dangerous creatures came near the camp, Krath would appear and drive them away. At night, Jake realized Krath often stayed close by, watching over him while he slept. On the 8th day, Jake woke to find Krath sitting closer than usual, looking agitated. The creature kept gesturing toward the sky and making urgent sounds. Jake didn't understand at first, but then he heard it. A low humming sound growing louder. A ship. His rescue had arrived. Jake felt a mixture of joy and sudden fear. Joy that he was going to survive, going to go home. Fear for what would happen to Krath. He knew enough about galactic politics to know that species like Krath, massive predators with intelligence, were often feared and hunted by the civilized worlds. The ship descended into the clearing, a medium-sized rescue frigate called the Horizon. Its landing lights illuminated the jungle, turning the purple trees strange colors. The side hatch opened and a squad of armed Marines came out, followed by a woman in a captain's uniform. Captain Lisa Grant scanned the area until she spotted Jake. "Lieutenant Morrison," she called out. "We received your distress signal. Are you injured?" "I'm okay," Jake shouted back. "But wait, don't shoot. I have someone with me. Someone who saved my life." "What do you mean, someone?" Lisa asked, her hand moving toward her sidearm. That's when Krath emerged from the jungle. The Marines immediately raised their weapons, shouting warnings. Jake heard the charge-up sound of plasma rifles being activated. He ran forward, putting himself between Krath and the Marines. "Don't shoot," Jake yelled. "He's my friend. He saved my life. His name is Krath." Lisa stared at the massive creature, her face pale. "Morrison, that's a Rexian. They're classified as hostile, non-sentient predators. Get away from it now." "He's not hostile," Jake insisted. "He's intelligent. He has a name. He's been protecting me for over a week." "That's impossible," one of the Marines said, his rifle still aimed at Krath. "Rexians are monsters. They've killed thousands of explorers." Jake looked back at Krath, who stood perfectly still, watching the armed humans with those glowing red eyes. He could run. He could disappear into the jungle and be safe. But he stayed, trusting Jake. "If he's a monster," Jake said quietly, turning back to the captain, "then why am I still alive? He could have killed me a dozen times. Instead, he fed me and protected me. He's my friend, and I won't leave without him." The standoff lasted for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Finally, Lisa lowered her weapon and signaled the Marines to do the same. "Against my better judgment," she said slowly, "we'll take you both aboard. But that thing stays in the cargo hold under guard. And Morrison, if this goes bad, it's on you." Jake nodded, relief flooding through him. He turned to Krath and gestured toward the ship. "Come on, friend. Let's go home." The news spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. A human had befriended a Vrexian. The story seemed impossible, ridiculous, dangerous. Within hours of the Horizon docking at Gateway Station, every major news network in Council space was running the story. Some called Jake a hero. Others called him a fool who had gotten lucky. Many called for Krath to be destroyed immediately. Jake spent those first few days in medical recovery, his arm being properly treated and his injuries healing. But his mind wasn't on his own health. It was on Krath, locked in a reinforced holding cell 3 levels below. The station's security had wanted to put him in stasis or even kill him outright, but Jake had threatened to go public with everything. The threat of bad publicity had kept Krath alive, but barely. On the 5th day, Ambassador Helen Brooks came to see Jake in his recovery room. She was a tall woman with gray hair and sharp eyes that had seen decades of diplomatic negotiations. She sat down across from Jake's bed and studied him carefully. "You've caused quite a stir, Lieutenant Morrison," she said. "I didn't mean to," Jake replied. "I just couldn't leave him behind. He saved my life, so I've heard, many times now from many sources." Helen leaned forward. "The Galactic Council has demanded a formal hearing. They want to determine if what happened on that moon changes anything about how we classify Vrexians. You and your friend will need to testify." "When?" 2 weeks. "On Council Prime, the capital world. This is going to be the most watched trial in decades, Jake. Are you ready for that?" Jake thought about Krath alone in that cell, probably confused and afraid. "I don't have a choice." Neither does he. The 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Helen and her team worked with Jake constantly, helping him organize his thoughts and evidence. They reviewed recordings from his survival suit that showed Krath saving him from the pack of wolf lizards. They documented every interaction, every gesture of friendship. Jake also spent hours each day visiting Krath in his cell, maintaining their bond and teaching him more human gestures and words. Council Prime was a beautiful world, a planet designed specifically to house the Galactic Council. Massive towers of crystal and metal reached toward the sky, representing each member species. The council chambers themselves were an architectural wonder, a vast circular room with seats for representatives from over 50 different species. When Jake and Krath were brought into the chamber, the reaction was immediate. Gasps of fear and surprise echoed through the room. Some representatives moved back in their seats. Others reached for weapons that weren't there. Security guards surrounded Krath, their weapons ready but not aimed. Krath walked calmly despite the fear around him, his red eyes fixed on Jake's back, trusting the small human who had become his only friend in a hostile galaxy. The trial began with High Chancellor Vorim, a crystalline being whose body refracted light into rainbow patterns, speaking in a voice that echoed through the chamber. "We are here to determine the nature of the being called Krath, and whether his actions indicate sentience worthy of council recognition. Ambassador Brooks, you may present your case." Helen stood, her voice clear and strong. "Honored representatives, what we have witnessed is not an anomaly but evidence of a terrible mistake. The Vrexians have been classified as non-sentient predators for over 200 years, hunted and killed on sight. But Lieutenant Morrison's experience proves what we should have investigated long ago. The Vrexians are intelligent, capable of complex thought, moral reasoning, and emotional bonds." She presented the evidence methodically: video footage of Krath saving Jake, documentation of their communication, analysis from xenopsychologists who had interviewed Jake extensively. Every piece built a picture of an intelligent being making conscious choices, not an animal acting on instinct. But the prosecution was fierce. A representative of the Sarkathi, a reptilian species called Ambassador Vex, stood to challenge the evidence. These actions could be explained by simple conditioning, Vex hissed. Perhaps this Vrexian saw the human as useful, as a pet or tool. We have documentation of Vrexian attacks going back centuries. They have killed thousands. To grant them sentience would be to admit we have been murdering thinking beings. That is politically impossible. So we should continue to murder them to avoid admitting we were wrong, Helen shot back. That's not justice. That's cowardice. The argument went back and forth for hours. Representatives from different species gave their opinions, many colored by fear and prejudice. Some supported Helen's position, fascinated by the implications. Others doubled down on the danger Vrexians represented. Finally, High Chancellor Vorim called for Jake to testify. He stood on a platform in the center of the chamber, surrounded by the council members, feeling very small and very human. Lieutenant Morrison, Vorim said, tell us in your own words what happened on that moon. Jake took a deep breath and told his story. Not the clinical, prepared version, but the real one. He talked about waking up in pain and fear, about hearing Krath's footsteps and thinking he was going to die. He described watching Krath fight off the pack of creatures, and the moment when Krath had thrown him food instead of killing him. I was terrified, Jake admitted. Everything I'd been taught said Vrexians were monsters. But Krath proved every day that he was more than that. He was kind. He was patient. He taught me his name and learned mine. He sat with me when I was scared, and protected me when I was vulnerable. That's not what monsters do. That's what friends do. And if we release this creature, Ambassador Vex challenged, what stops it from killing others? Your emotional attachment doesn't change the danger it represents. He's not an it, Jake said firmly. His name is Krath, and yes, he's dangerous. So am I. So is every species in this chamber. We all evolved from predators or prey, and we all have the capacity for violence. What makes us civilized isn't whether we can kill. It's whether we choose not to. The words hung in the air. Then Jake turned directly to Krath, who sat in a reinforced witness area surrounded by guards. Krath, can you speak to them? Tell them who you are? The silence was complete as every being in the chamber waited. Krath stood slowly, his massive form unfolding. The guards tensed, but he made no aggressive moves. Instead, he touched the translator device attached to his chest, a piece of technology hastily modified to work with his voice. I am Krath of the Mountain Clans, he said, his voice deep and rumbling even through the translator. I was cast out from my people because I showed mercy to wounded prey. Among my kind, this was seen as weakness, as shameful. I wandered alone, believing I was broken, that something inside me was wrong. He paused, looking around the chamber at all the species watching him. Then I found Jake, small, injured, afraid. Every instinct told me he was prey, but something else told me he was more. So I chose. I chose to protect instead of hunt, to help instead of harm. And in doing so, I learned I was not broken. I was simply more than what others expected me to be. Krath turned his red eyes to the High Chancellor. You fear my kind because we are strong, because we can kill. But strength without choice is not truly strength. It is slavery to instinct. I am what I choose to be, not what you fear I am. And I choose to be more than a monster in your nightmares. The chamber erupted in discussion. Some representatives argued passionately for Krath's recognition. Others remained skeptical or afraid. The debate raged for another 2 hours before High Chancellor Vorim called for order. We will vote, Vorim announced. All in favor of granting provisional sentient status to the Vrexian species, with immediate cessation of hostile classification. The vote was close. Out of 53 representatives, 29 voted in favor, 18 against, and 6 abstained. It was just enough. The motion passes, Vorim declared. The Vrexians are hereby granted provisional sentient status. A diplomatic mission will be established to locate and contact surviving populations. Ambassador Brooks, your people will lead this mission, with Lieutenant Morrison and Krath serving as primary liaisons. Jake felt like he couldn't breathe. They had won. It seemed impossible, but they had actually won. Helen smiled at him as they left the chamber. You did well, Lieutenant. You and Krath both. You've changed history today. But Jake knew the hard part was just beginning. Convincing the Council was one thing. Convincing the galaxy was another. And finding the Vrexians who had survived centuries of being hunted would be the greatest challenge of all. Still, as he walked alongside Krath through the halls of Council Prime, no longer prisoner and guard but partners, Jake felt hope. If they could bridge the gap between human and Vrexian, maybe they could help heal the wounds between their entire peoples. They would need that unity sooner than anyone knew. Because far out on the galactic rim, an ancient enemy was preparing to invade, and the Council would need every ally it could find. 6 months after the trial, the galaxy had settled into an uneasy new normal. The diplomatic mission to find the Vrexians had made slow progress, discovering small, scattered settlements in the outer reaches. Some Vrexians were willing to talk, curious about Krath's claims of acceptance. Others were deeply suspicious, their hatred of Council species hardened by centuries of persecution. Jake and Krath worked tirelessly as bridges between the two sides, but trust took time to build. Then everything changed. The attack came without warning. The Karsthan Imperium, a militant civilization from beyond the galactic rim, launched a massive invasion into Council space. Their fleet appeared simultaneously at 12 different systems, catching everyone completely off guard. The first battle reports were catastrophic. 3 colony worlds went dark within hours. The Council defense fleet scrambled to respond, but the Karsthan technology was superior, their tactics brutal and efficient. Jake was on Gateway Station when the news broke. He had been preparing for another diplomatic mission to the Vrexian settlements when alarms started blaring throughout the station. Every screen switched to emergency broadcasts showing the invasion fleets, massive dark ships that seemed to swallow light itself. Krath found him in the command center, where Ambassador Helen was coordinating with Council military leaders. The Vrexian moved through the panicked crowd without hesitation, his presence now tolerated if not welcomed. Jake saw him coming and felt a knot of fear in his stomach. Not fear of Krath, but fear of what was happening. How bad is it? Krath asked, his translator converting his rumbling voice to standard galactic. Very bad, Jake replied. They're calling it a full-scale invasion. The Karsthan have been building their forces for decades, apparently. We knew they were expansionist, but nobody thought they'd dare attack the Council directly. On the main screen, a battle raged near a planet called Centauri Prime. Council ships fought desperately against the dark Karsthan vessels, but they were outmatched. As Jake watched, a Council frigate exploded in a ball of fire and debris. He thought about the hundreds of crew members who had just died, lives snuffed out in an instant. We need to evacuate Gateway Station, Helen said, her voice tight with stress. Intelligence suggests the Karsthan are targeting major hubs. We could be next, she was right. 2 days later, the Karsthan fleet arrived at Gateway Station. Jake and Krath were on one of the last evacuation ships to leave, watching through the viewports as the station fought a desperate defensive battle. The Karsthan ships were terrifying, all sharp angles and dark metal, with weapons that tore through shields like paper. Their evacuation ship, a transport called the Swift Current, barely made it to the jump point before Gateway Station fell. Jake watched the massive structure break apart, millions of tons of metal and technology reduced to wreckage. Thousands of people who hadn't evacuated in time died in seconds. The Swift Current jumped to a rally point where the surviving Council fleet was gathering. What Jake saw there shocked him. The once mighty Council Navy looked like a fraction of its former self. Ships showed heavy damage, some held together by temporary repairs. Crews were exhausted, traumatized by battles against an enemy that seemed unstoppable. Admiral Lisa Grant, promoted from captain after heavy losses among senior command, called a strategy meeting aboard her new flagship. Jake and Krath attended as liaison officers, though Jake felt wildly out of his depth. He was a scout pilot, not a military strategist. We're losing, Lisa said bluntly, her face haggard from lack of sleep. The Karsthan have better weapons, better shields, and more ships than our intelligence ever suggested. At this rate, they'll control half of Council space within 6 months. We need something to change the equation, and we need it now. What about the member species reserves? Someone asked. Surely the home fleets haven't committed yet. They're coming, but slowly. Everyone's scared. Half the Council members are considering surrender, rather than see their homeworlds destroyed. Lisa slammed her fist on the table. We need a miracle. That's when Krath spoke up. My people can help. The room went silent. Everyone turned to look at the massive Vrexian. Jake saw the mix of emotions on their faces, hope, skepticism, and lingering fear. Your people? Lisa asked carefully. The Vrexians. How many are we talking about? Not as many as you would hope, Krath admitted. Centuries of being hunted have reduced us to perhaps 50,000 across all settlements. But we are warriors. We know how to fight in ways you do not. And we have been watching the Karsthan for years. This got everyone's attention. Watching them? Explain. Krath touched a control panel and a star map appeared. Several systems on the galactic rim lit up in red. These are Karsten staging areas. We discovered them 3 years ago when our scouts ventured beyond known space. We watched their ships gather, watched them train. We knew an attack was coming, but we had no way to warn anyone who would listen. You have intelligence on their fleet positions? Lisa leaned forward. On their command structure? Their supply lines? Yes, my people are survivors. We hide, we watch, we learn. The Karsten do not know we exist. They are careful around council species, but they do not watch for us. We can move through their territory unseen. Jake's mind raced with possibilities. Guerrilla warfare, hit-and-run attacks on supply depots, sabotage of command facilities. The Karsten are used to conventional warfare, fleet battles in open space. But if you could strike at their logistics, create chaos behind their lines, it would require trusting us with military operations, Krath said, looking directly at Lisa. Giving Vrexians weapons and transport, treating us as allies in truth, not just on paper. Many of your people will not accept this. Lisa was quiet for a long moment, her jaw clenched. Finally, she spoke. 6 months ago, I would have said no. I would have called you monsters and been done with it. But I've watched Lieutenant Morrison work with you. I've seen the reports from the diplomatic missions. And right now, I'll take help from anyone willing to fight. She stood up, her decision made. I'll present this to what's left of the council leadership. But I want you to know if your people do this, if they fight alongside us, it will change everything. There will be no going back to the old ways. Good, Krath rumbled. The old ways are why my people have suffered for so long. It is time for something new. The council approved the plan out of desperation more than trust. Within a week, Jake and Krath were on a ship heading to the Void Reaches, the unexplored region where the largest Vrexian settlements had been discovered. Their mission was simple but terrifying. Convince the Vrexians to join a war against the Karsten. As their ship jumped through the darkness between stars, Jake looked over at his friend. Krath sat motionless, his red eyes distant, lost in thought. Are you scared? Jake asked quietly. Yes, Krath admitted. I was cast out by my people for showing mercy. Now I must ask them to show mercy to those who hunted us, while asking them to fight a war that is not theirs. They may kill me for even suggesting it. Then why are we doing this? Krath looked at him, and Jake saw something in those alien eyes he had learned to recognize. Determination. Because you showed me that what we are is not fixed. We can choose to be more. Now I must show my people the same thing. We can be warriors and still have honor. We can be predators and still have compassion. We can be strong enough to protect instead of destroy. Jake nodded slowly. And if they say no, then the galaxy will fall to the Karsten, and my people will be hunted again by whoever survives. We have no choice but to try. The ship continued on through the darkness, carrying 2 friends toward an uncertain future, hoping against hope that an act of mercy could inspire an entire species to fight for those who had once tried to destroy them. The Void Reaches earned their name. This region of space sat between major stellar arms, a dark expanse where stars were scattered thin and sensor technology struggled to function properly. It was perfect for a people trying to hide from a galaxy that wanted them dead. The Vrexian settlements were built in asteroid clusters and on dark moons orbiting rogue planets, invisible to anyone who didn't know exactly where to look. Krath guided their ship through the darkness with the confidence of someone who had walked these paths before his exile. Jake watched the sensors, seeing nothing but empty space, trusting his friend completely. After 3 days of travel, Krath finally signaled the pilot to drop out of faster-than-light travel. A massive asteroid field appeared before them. But as Jake looked closer, he realized the asteroids weren't natural. They were connected by structures, tunnels carved through rock, habitats built into the stone. This was a city, hidden in plain sight among the debris of dead planets. Home, Krath said quietly, his voice carrying emotions Jake had rarely heard from his friend. Pain, longing, and fear all mixed together. The ship approached slowly, transmitting the recognition codes Krath provided. For several tense minutes there was no response. Then a path through the asteroid field lit up with guide lights, and a voice spoke in the rumbling, clicking language of the Vrexians. Krath responded, speaking too fast for Jake to catch even the few words he had learned. They docked in a hangar carved from solid rock. When the airlock opened, a dozen Vrexians waited for them. All were as large and imposing as Krath, their obsidian scales gleaming in the harsh lights, their red eyes fixed on the newcomers. Jake felt his heart race, ancient human instincts screaming at him to run from these predators. But he stepped forward beside Krath, refusing to show fear. One of the Vrexians, slightly larger than the others, with scales that had faded to gray with age, stepped forward. He spoke, and Krath's translator converted the words, "Krath of the mountain clans, you were exiled for weakness, for showing mercy to prey. Yet you return bringing prey with you as companion. Have you lost your mind along with your honor?" "Elder Vex," Krath replied, his voice steady despite the challenge. "I return not to reclaim my place, but to offer my people a chance to reclaim theirs in the galaxy. This is Jake Morrison, my friend, who showed me that mercy is not weakness but strength. I bring news of war and an offer of alliance." The elder's eyes narrowed. "Alliance? With those who hunted us, who declared us monsters and killed us by the thousands? You truly have gone mad." "The galaxy is being invaded," Krath continued. "The Karsten Imperium has launched a war of conquest. They have already destroyed 3 council worlds and killed millions. If they win, they will hunt us just as the council did, perhaps worse. We can hide here and hope they never find us, or we can fight alongside those who have wronged us and prove we are more than monsters." The argument that followed was fierce. Elder Vex brought Krath and Jake before the clan council, a gathering of the eldest and most respected Vrexians. The chamber where they met was carved from crystal that glowed with inner light, beautiful and ancient. Dozens of elders sat in a circle, their combined presence overwhelming. Jake listened as they debated in their own language, the translator struggling to keep up. Some argued for isolation, for maintaining their hidden existence. Others spoke of the centuries of persecution, of children killed by council species, of the right to let their enemies destroy each other. The anger was understandable, the pain real and deep. Finally, Elder Vex turned to Jake. "Human, Krath claims you are his friend, that you showed him mercy when you could have killed him. Speak. Tell us why we should risk our people for those who have shown us only hatred." Jake stood, his legs shaking but his voice clear. "I can't give you a good reason," he admitted. "Everything you say is true. The council treated you terribly. They called you monsters, hunted you, and tried to wipe you out. If you chose to let them face the Karsten alone, I would understand." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "But I can tell you what I learned from Krath. I learned that what others call us doesn't have to define who we are. I was taught Vrexians were mindless killers, but Krath proved that wrong every single day. He chose to be more than what the galaxy expected." Jake looked around the circle of elders. "The council was wrong about you. Maybe this is your chance to prove just how wrong they were, not by hiding or by revenge, but by showing mercy to those who showed you none. By fighting not because you have to, but because you choose to, because that's what civilized people do. They protect those who can't protect themselves, even if those people don't deserve it. And if we fight and die for these people," another elder challenged, "what guarantee do we have that they won't turn on us again when the war is over?" "None," Jake said honestly. "I can't promise the council will treat you fairly. I can't promise humans or any other species will suddenly forget centuries of fear and hatred. All I can promise is that Krath and I will keep fighting for your recognition, for your rights, for your place in the galaxy, and that if you help save the council, it will be a lot harder for anyone to call you monsters ever again." The debate continued for hours. Jake was eventually asked to leave while the elders deliberated privately. He waited in a small chamber with Krath, neither of them speaking, both lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Elder Vex came to get them. His expression was unreadable. "The clans have voted. It was close, closer than any vote in our history, but we have decided to help you." Jake felt relief flood through him. "Thank you. You won't regret this." "We already regret it," Elder Vex said bluntly. "But Krath is right about one thing. We are tired of hiding, tired of being victims. If we must fight, better to fight for something than to simply wait to die. We will send warriors to your council fleet." "How many?" Jake asked. "All who are able. Perhaps 15,000. It is not many compared to your millions, but each Vrexian warrior is worth 10 of any other species in ground combat." Over the next 2 weeks, Jake watched in amazement as the Vrexian clans prepared for war. They were natural warriors, their culture built around honor and combat, but they had adapted to their circumstances. They fought with stealth and cunning, using the environment to their advantage. They could move through hostile territory without being detected, strike without warning, and disappear before anyone knew they were there. Admiral Lisa was equally impressed when the Vrexian forces arrived at the rally point. 15,000 Vrexian warriors in adapted armor, ready to fight. The human Marines trained with them, learning their tactics, building trust through shared hardship. It wasn't easy. There were incidents, moments when old fears and prejudices flared up. But Jake and Krath worked tirelessly to bridge the gaps, to remind both sides why they were fighting together. The strategy was revolutionary. While the Council fleet engaged the Karsthan in conventional battles, Vrexian strike teams would infiltrate behind enemy lines. They would sabotage supply depots, destroy communication relays, and generally create chaos in the Karsten rear. The goal was to stretch the enemy thin, force them to defend everywhere at once, and buy time for the Council's reinforcements to arrive. The first mission was a raid on a Karsthan fuel depot in the Orion sector. Jake insisted on going with Krath's team, despite Lisa's objections. They used a stealth ship to slip past Karsten patrols, landed on a dark moon where the depot was hidden, and approached on foot through rocky terrain. Jake had trained with the Marines, thought he was in good shape. But trying to keep up with Vrexians in their natural element was humbling. They moved through the darkness like liquid shadows, utterly silent despite their size. Krath stayed close to Jake, helping him navigate the rough terrain. The depot was heavily guarded, but the Karsten weren't expecting an attack from this direction. The Vrexians struck with brutal efficiency. Jake provided technical support, using his knowledge of Council systems to hack into the Karsten computers and download their logistics data before planting explosives throughout the facility. They were back on their ship and jumping to safety before the Karsten even realized they had been attacked. Behind them, the depot exploded in a fireball visible from orbit, taking out enough fuel to supply the Karsten fleet for a month. It was the first of many such raids. Over the next 3 months, Vrexian strike teams hit dozens of targets across Karsten-held space. Supply lines broke down. Communications became unreliable. Karsten commanders had to pull ships back from the front lines to protect their rear areas, giving the Council fleet breathing room to regroup and counterattack. The turning point came at the Iron Crown, a massive fortress station that served as the Karsten Forward Command Base. Intelligence suggested that destroying the command network housed in the station would cripple the entire invasion force. But it was the most heavily defended target in Karsten space, practically impregnable. The plan was insane. Admiral Lisa would lead the entire Council fleet in a frontal assault, drawing out the Karsten defensive forces. While the space battle raged, Jake, Krath, and an elite team of Vrexian and human soldiers would infiltrate the station, fight their way to the command center, and destroy it from within. The battle was the largest of the war. Hundreds of ships on both sides,